breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James. So let's get started with a question. What do you expect from the labor market in 2023?
It's a good question. To answer it, I like jumping in and trying to answer the question right off the bat, but for this one, we need to actually take a step back. And in order to know where we are going, we need to first look at where we have been and how we got here. So a very brief history lesson of the last 5 years in terms of labor market expectation and what's been going on is if we look at kind of pre-pandemic years, 2018, 2019, even the first part of 2020, we saw an increase in both union strikes and union busting activities. The number of strike action that involved large numbers of employees grew drastically between 2016 and 2018. Pre-pandemic, we've heard requests for better work-life balance. Like that, mental health was already a big issue at that time, and people were talking about work-life balance a lot. Remote working kind of was starting to come to the forefront, but we heard a large percentage of companies saying we're not there yet. We cannot make remote working a reality. The pandemic,
and you're right, and that was something that we saw a lot of. Like we started doing more virtual meetings with our clients, and we would and stuff like that, kind of like pre-pandemic, and it was like, oh, there's this thing called Zoom, and sure, I've never heard of it. I'll give it a shot. So it's kind of funny now to think of it that way, but yeah, you're right. There was a lot of people going like, oh, why can't I work from home? Oh, well, that's not possible. Work can only be done from the office and
right.
everything. So don't even bother to ask about that because they'll just never happen.
If you don't have your bum in the seat in the office, you're obviously not being productive. Right. That was the prevailing idea. Right. We took a very traditional approach. The technology was there to support it. And many people were already engaged in work from home activities in a whole bunch of different sectors, but it had not really entered a mainstream application. People were not yet taking advantage of the resources that were available to them.
It was kind of like a fringe benefit. Like it's more like, don't take a sick day, take a work from home day and still work, but you're home in your pajamas. So it's more like a sick day. That was kind of how a lot of companies justified it in some way, but it was never like an actual option to do work.
Right. And then the pandemic hit, right? Yeah. And nobody's working from the office, right? The vast majority of people are like we were in lockdowns all across Canada. We could not
across the world, really.
Across the world. Yeah. I mean, the lockdowns happened at different times, but very, very few people were unaffected by lockdowns due to COVID.
Absolutely.
And suddenly what people had been asking for is businesses were forced to look at these options, right? And that's why remote working and applications like Zoom and Teams and these tools that we use all the time now really became mainstream. And it's also because why we had a lot of blunders with them and people wearing a suit and jacket in their underwear because they never have to stand up until they actually forget and they go let their dog out. And right there were some amusing mishaps with
filters and that kind of stuff. That. Yeah, that was entertaining. Yeah.
But necessity drove the need for adoption, which it always does, right?
Yeah. Exactly. But also there was it was kind of the two options was pretty much during lockdowns for the non-essential worker was either layoff or remote work.
Yeah.
So let's not forget massive layoffs. People ended their jobs, but so either people were most people were home, whether it was they were working from home or they were just unemployed and home, but it really became, the two things, right? It was remote work or layoff for a lot of people.
And I cannot emphasize enough how damaging that layoff structure was in terms of the effect that it had on the labor market as a whole, right? Businesses, the common response to challenging situations, whether that's a global pandemic, which we had no basis for, like our reaction to, or whether it's a recession, the default is to cut costs. And when you view employees as a cost, as just a commodity that can be cut, it causes a substantial number of problems. And we are still experiencing the problems that have come from that reaction, right? When businesses, that was one of the big reactions that businesses had to the pandemic was our business. We don't know what's going to happen to our business. We don't know what's going to happen to our contracts. We don't know when we're going to be able to bring people back into the office. So we're just going to lay everybody off and hope for the best. Hopefully we can, if we can recover, we can bring people back.
Right.
The problem is that showed when you do those types of mass layoffs, it shows the labor market that they are expendable, right? We talked about in other conversations that the relationship that you have with the labor market, it operates in a very similar way to consumer markets. And when people feel like they are not getting the value, when people feel like they're not being treated properly, either as a consumer or as a part of that labor market, they're not going to engage with you.
Right.
Anyways, that's a little bit of a tangent. Let's jump back into our timeline so we can see where we've been and where we are now so that we can talk about where we're actually going.
All right.
So during the huge disruption, people collectively realized how stressed, overworked, and burned out they were and unappreciated.
Yeah.
And this led to what became known as the Great Resignation, right? People, once the lockdowns were over and people were being forced back into that work environment, they had an opportunity to step away and they saw what life could be without that stress. And that turned into millions and millions of people either quitting, stepping back in hours, or finding new jobs. And actually, Kobe, you have an excellent analogy that you've talked about before with this.
Yep. Yeah. Like when we give webinars, or even our very first podcast episode on quiet quitting,
right.
I talked about the boiling frog theory. And so again, I'll just recap that real quick, because if you already heard the episode 1, I don't want to hear the same thing over and over and over again. But the idea is that when you put a frog into temperate water and you slowly turn up the heat, the frog can survive even at boiling through adapting slowly over time. That is kind of what happened to all of us over the past 20 years. We were all put into temperate water decades ago, but slowly workloads got larger. The gap between the cost of living gap got larger, more stress, more pressure. All this kind of stuff slowly turned the water up on us. And essentially we were there in 2019, early 2020, boiling alive. And then all of a sudden we were pulled out of our pots when the pandemic hit and lockdowns happened and we were all home. And while we were there, like a frog pulled out of boiling water, we cooled down.
Mm-hmm.
And then when things started to become more operational again in the fall of 2020 and early 2021, the water was not turned down, but the employers were like, all right, everybody back in the pot. And we were like, no, we're not ready for that. We're not
putting up with that. I don't want to burn alive.
Exactly.
Alive.
And so, this was the reaction, why the Great Resignation really started to happen. And when this kind of came out, like, so we were giving webinar talks and presentations and talking to clients, in this time during late 2020, early 2021, we were saying, listen, this is a golden opportunity for us to learn that the water is too hot. We need to address things like job dissatisfaction. We need to reduce the problems internally that are causing burnout. We have to turn the water down because people have realized, this collective realization has happened. We can't unring the bell where it's here and everyone knows it. It's not, things aren't going to go back to the way they were. And we said, if businesses learn from this, they will create a better, more sustainable environment and culture with their employees that will stand the test of time and allow them to almost recover at a much higher rate than those that don't. But those that don't are going to experience what we dubbed as the great disengagement. People will say, well, I have to go back to work. I need a paycheck, so I'll work for you, but I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And what that became is what is now known as quiet quitting.
Yeah, and it's important to really emphasize that the conditions of the workplace is what kept that temperature hot. And without addressing that, that's why what we started to hear along those same lines, kind of in between the Great Resignation and before we started hearing the term the quiet quitting, we started to hear about the war for talent. Right? Because so many people were looking for new jobs because everybody wanted out of the environment that they were in. So they were looking for the better opportunity, which created this idea of the war for talent. And what was referred to as a labor shortage, although it's not really a labor shortage, it's more of a shortage of actually decent jobs. But I won't get on my soapbox right now.
Not right now.
Not right now, but it's coming. Trust me. But that transition of, people stopping the quitting and leaving, and then they start quitting the job and staying is what happened with the transition from the Great Resignation to quiet quitting.
Yeah.
So the question is, we've gone from this, we started back in 2018, well, even before then, but 2018, 2019, mental health, work-life balance, conditions of the workplace were top of mind.
Right.
COVID hit. Everybody was pulled out of the environment that they were in and had an opportunity to really see how bad things had gotten.
Yeah.
Businesses tried tossing everybody back into the pot without addressing any of those core fundamental factors of the workplace that caused the problems in the first place. And everybody's reaction was, hell no, I'm not going back. They jumped out of the pot, right?
Yeah.
They could not stand the temperature. Many businesses still have not addressed those core fundamental problems, which caused people need a paycheck. The businesses that said, well, I'm just going to ride it out and wait. Well, yeah, you can do that, but you're bringing people into an environment that is too hot. So they are going to not quit the job and leave your organization. They're going to quit the job and stay put. And they're just collecting a paycheck, which is what you don't want.
Yeah.
All right. It's the businesses that actually learned from it, that started to invest in their workplace culture. Those are the ones who made room at the top.
Yeah. And this is going to be, I was like, spoiler alert for the end of this podcast, but the lessons not learned is probably going to be, is the underlying theme here. Like, I don't mean we as you and I mean, we collectively, people have been trying to say, this is going to happen. This is not good. It's not sustainable. And most businesses, again, lean into that. I think we use the term in another podcast, but the implicit bias to convention, that the old ways are the better ways.
Right.
And things will go back to normal if we'll just ride everything out. But we're saying you can't do that. The time has come. We have to adapt, and you have to learn from this, because the problem is we're coming into, times aren't getting easier; they're getting tougher, and if businesses who keep not learning from these constant lessons are probably on borrowed time.
Well, and that leads us to, where are we today?
Yeah.
Right now, at the end of 2022, we have record inflation. The cost of living is absurd all across the world. We can speak specifically around the environment in Canada, and because of proximity and how much US media we consume anyways in Canada, right?
Yeah.
We've got a really good, North American we can speak to with some confidence. Both of our countries, Canada and the United States, every indication says that we are not currently in a recession, but we are headed towards a recession in 2023, right? We have, wages have not kept up with inflation. So people are earning less today than they did a year ago. Everything is getting more expensive. Gas is astronomical. Groceries are astronomical. Rent is astronomical. If you are housing costs are astronomical. Everything is just so bloody expensive that this has a major impact on the labor market and what they need and what they expect and what businesses are able to provide. This is a difficult time for many, many, many people. We're heading into a recession. Every indication says that we are heading into a recession. And businesses, what is the typical response? How do businesses typically respond when it comes to a recessionary period? They lay people off, right? They cut costs. Marketing, which is a dumb thing to cut anyways. I'm sorry, but if you're going to stop telling people about your product during the hard times, you're not going to get more sales. But anyways, marketing tends to be something that people cut. I see this a lot with small businesses, especially in labor, right?
Yeah.
It's you cut what you feel is extraneous because we're in survival mode, right? Which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do what we feel is best for our businesses, right? We need the business to survive so that we have money throughout and afterwards. We need the business to survive so that we can employ people throughout and afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But the response that we take as business owners to the looming recession, many businesses have already started prepping for the recession by laying people off.
Yeah. And I think that this goes back to what I said before, that I think the theme through this talk is going to be about not learning the lesson.
Stop making the same mistakes over and over again.
So what we use to try and clarify this big picture. So I think one of the advantages that we have in our work is, as workforce experts, we can see this from a historical perspective, and we can always look at things from a psychological perspective. And that's part of what gives us a little bit different view on things. So we look at this whole thing through the context of what we call the fragile grip principle. Now, what is a fragile grip principle? Well, it's the acknowledgement that there's a fragile relationship that is between employees and employers, and that relationship, how it's handled by employers, greatly impacts the future success of the business. So there are three types of grips that the business uses to hold on to the fragile bond between itself and its employees. Now, the first one is the harsh grip. This is where they grip too tight. They crush the fragile bond like a raw egg in their hand, and they have oozing down the sides, right? They try and squeeze every ounce of productivity or work out of employees and put a stranglehold on their daily interactions.
And this is stuff like the mistakes that we see in this, incredibly restrictive non-competes, or even probably far, far more common is invasive software on computers to track eye movement to make sure that people are sitting in front of their desks, right? Tapping into their cameras to monitor them when they're working from home, key logging software that tracks every keystroke, right? These things are not going to build any type of trust or respect between you and your employees. All it's going to do is showcase that you don't trust people, you don't care about people, and you're not looking out for them.
It's kind of like so individual managers may make the mistake in micromanaging, but
Right.
but the harsh grip is kind of like when the organization's policies are to micromanage.
Yeah.
It's about crushing that relationship and pressing it to a point that you are mistakenly assuming that this extra attention and effort and control is improving output and improving productivity, when it is definitely not.
I get the logic behind it, because the logic is we need to tighten our belts, right? We need to do more with less, or we need to squeeze every ounce of productivity to make sure that we can remain profitable. But you don't increase productivity by squeezing the life out of somebody, right? You don't cut off somebody's oxygen and expect them to run a marathon, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, and the whole idea of the harsh grip, you're right. It is that, like we have to do more with less or whatever, but it's in a sense of when things are tough, the more control I have, the more I can guarantee that we're going to last and succeed, and ride this through. And what that does is it damages that fragile bond, that fragile relationship.
I want to talk very briefly about that relationship. Because we have to understand that it is perfectly normal and natural that employers, businesses are going to do what is best for them. We also need to acknowledge that it is perfectly normal and natural that employees are going to do what is best for them.
Yes.
Right. This is the inherent conflict in the employer-employee relationship, right?
Yeah.
You have two opposing sides that have different needs, right? They are each going to act in their own self-interest, because we all do this, right? We all need to prioritize what is best for me and my family over what is best for somebody else's, right? I need to make sure that my family is fed.
Yeah.
But the way that we approach this relationship, that's why the relationship is fragile. When we say there's a fragile bond, it's because of the inherent conflict there.
Yes.
And right. But just because it's fragile doesn't mean that that we're not able to sustain it through hard times. It means that it's going to require more intentional effort to maintain that relationship during the hard times than maybe it does when things are going really, really well.
Well, and part of it is actually just acknowledging its fragility.
Yeah.
And not letting the fragility almost be its weakness.
Right.
So let's move on. So with that, so the first one we mentioned was the harsh grip, where you crush too tight. Now, the second mistake that a lot of businesses make is the other end, the weak grip, where they grip it too loose, where they neglect the fragile bond, like dropping that raw egg out of their hand.
Yeah. Like laying people off.
Yes, it's when they see the hard times, they abandon that rapport and the relationships. At the first sign of trouble, their gut reaction is, "Well, these things are getting hard. Everybody out." Yeah. Which again makes which is more of the common the reaction, and then it's exceedingly frustrating on the workforce side when you see, oh, recession's coming and all these big companies are laying people off, and then they're posting record profits and stuff like that. And that type of contradictory information can make can even damage what's an already broken relationship between the employer and employer even worse, right?
But I mean, and that's also that right there, that comment about the inequality in laying people off and posting continuous quarter after quarter after quarter profits.
Yeah.
That, going back to what we talked about earlier, like there's a reason why unionization rates and union activity has become more prominent, with large strikes, with big recruitment efforts, with big unionization efforts, especially in industries that have traditionally been very, very hard for people to unionize. Starbucks has just gone gangbusters with the unionization. Like, props to them, the organizers there, because they've done an amazing job. Amazon, which has resisted unionization for a long time, and they've got a firm grip. Like they push the life out of most people. I don't think I'm gonna get any hate mail from Amazon, but if I do, it's all good.
We'll just put on the pile of the rest of your hate mail.
Yeah, well, I'm used to people not liking me. It's okay.
So this brings us to the third grip, which we call the stable grip.
Yeah.
And this is actually when they can grip with balance and support to actually maintain the integrity of the fragile bond, where they provide the required attention and the required care, and they understand the long-term mutual benefit that the relationship between the employee and employer was designed for. And this is when we say about learning your lesson. Is to learn, maybe we need to stop crushing people with the hard grip or letting people drop with the weak grip, and actually lean into the stable grip and maintain the integrity of this fragile bond between employees and employers.
And I just want to say that with this stable grip, we're not saying that you can't ever lay somebody off.
Oh yeah, of course not.
Business needs will be paramount. We will have to do what is in the best interest of our businesses. Full stop. But we can do that in a way that is respectful of the individuals that who work with us and for us, right? Yeah. And that is one of the cornerstones of this stable grip is transparent communication, right? Simply acknowledging that there are, like, we all know that we're heading into hard times. Being upfront with people about that and saying, and making a commitment that we're going to do everything that we can to minimize the impact, gives people a sense of care, that they are actually seen and valued as a person, right? These things can make a difference. And if you can avoid the mass layoff approach, or if you can avoid the strangling the life out of people approach, which you probably want to avoid generally strangling the life out of people, just as a life
hard rule right there.
Just don't do it. Yeah, I need to stop cracking jokes in the middle of my train of thought, because now I've lost it. But those who can learn from the lessons of the past, right? If we can actually move towards respecting the fragility of the relationship, acknowledging that, and actively working to find a balance, that will create many, many more opportunities for you as a business.
Yeah. So the one thing that I think is really important for people to know is that we're not saying that look out for the harsh grip and the weak grip that's coming. We're saying that's happening now.
Yeah.
The harsh grip is what has led to what is a new term du jour, which is productivity paranoia. We did a video on our YouTube channel, Solutions Explained by Roman 3, a little while ago about that explains that in more detail. But it's the idea of that overbearing fear, that paranoia that people are not working, so they ramp up the oversight to maintain that. And then on the weak grip side, that we've actually seen this, we've seen this a lot since COVID, because this was kind of or since the lockdowns, because this kind of was how this was responded to. And I think the term that we see for the weak grip is the no one wants to work anymore mentality. Yeah. That's really what the weak grip look again,
the effect of the weak
yes,
grip.
the consequences of the weak grip. That's what that looks like now.
And spoiler alert, it's not that nobody wants to work anymore, it's that they don't want to work for you anymore.
Yes. So if you are a business that has leaned into the weak grip,
But
and
you can change that.
yes, and that's really what we're trying to get to, is that we are on the precipice of needing to make some hard decisions. So and some of them are people already are making them, but we've been given enough lessons to learn that we can avoid the mistakes of the harsh grip and avoid the mistakes of the weak grip and start to lean into the stable grip, because the stable grip is largely what we talk about when we're talking about things like a strong employer brand,
Yeah.
or the creating the becoming a culture leader. These are not the same thing, but those are kind of the mentality of employees are not expenses, they're assets. We invest in people. We don't, they're not just commodities. This type of mindset, mentality, approach to business and leadership, and this humanistic view of the world it exists within the stable grip. And it's almost like we are saying that that the humanity approach, the understanding, valuing people as people and seeing them as people, that is a true option that can actually allow you to weather the storm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we need to go back to our original question of, what can people expect in the labor market in 2023? Well, we know that we're headed into a recession. And what happens, what is the predominant response when recessions hit? It's to lay people off. What we can expect is a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
In terms of how businesses treat and operate and treat whatever their employees. But here's the thing, and this is really what I want to convey to people, is that in a race to the bottom, it leaves a whole lot of room at the top for new players to become leaders, right? When everybody else is making the same mistakes that they've made in the past, then it gives you an opportunity as a conscientious employer, as a business that wants to progress beyond the recession, because we know the average length of a modern recession is 10 months. Recession is not going to last forever. It's going to feel like it's lasting forever, and it's going to be a really difficult time for all of us. But it's typically lasts about 3/4 of the year, or maybe a little bit more than that. So what are you going to do coming out of coming into the end of 2023, where the recession is at an end, and now you've destroyed your reputation in the labor market, or now you have laid off all of your top talent and they've been poached by other people? We already are experiencing tremendous challenges in attracting and retaining good people, good workers. That's only going to get worse if you continue to act in the way that you have in the past, of laying people off or suffocating them with control.
Yeah. And so, yes, so this is really what we feel Roman 3 is coming next. And we're calling it the amazing race to the bottom. Because everything needs to have a fun little name. But really, it's those that use the harsh and weak grip. Those ones are going to be racing to the bottom, where they're going to be sacrificing the long-term reputation and the integrity of their fragile relationship with employees for short-term gain, going beyond what's operationally necessary and just leaning into either the weak grip or the harsh grip to try and maintain control, or just to do what they've always done. But what James is saying by there's room at the top, but what that means is that this provides an opportunity, and it's a big opportunity for people to say that acknowledge the value of the stable grip, to say, what if we did only what was operationally required to cut costs, and we actually let employees know that there was actually going to be, we're going to do everything we can, everything creative, everything collaborative, everything innovative we can, try and maintain this fragile relationship and support them and our long-term success with them to try and weather the storm together. Is we see businesses that lean into the culture leadership, that lean into these progressive and human-centric workplaces that kill it in the labor market, that never have to worry about filling vacancies. Their talent pipeline is strong and secure, and their consumer reputation is equally as strong because it's leveraging the value of the labor market. And what's so funny is, like, we work in different groups and we see these rare few diamonds in the rough that are these industry leaders on the labor end, especially. And we're like, you know what, there is enough room for like 4 or 5 or 6 of their competitors to be there with them. That's how big this room at the top is, but everyone is fighting for jockeying for space at the bottom, it seems like.
Well, and that's just it. And when your competitors start laying off their talented employees, you want to start investing and picking them up, right? If you're struggling for talent, you actually have an opportunity coming up to pick up some excellent people who are going to be treated like garbage by some of your competitors.
Yeah. So, and I mean, because again, tough times tend to bring out the worst in people and businesses, but what we're trying to say is to learn the lessons from the past and break the cycle of these mistakes that we always make when it comes to hard times and recessions, and really value and lean into the stable grip.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'll give us a bit of a summary and then we'll call it a day.
Cool.
So we want to look at what's going to happen in 2023 for the labor market. We need to understand of where we've come from to how we got there. Pre-pandemic, we had a raise in union strikes and union busting and people wanting to work from home that they were told was not an option. Then we had, the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden it became a real option for people, but people got to see what their lives would like without the stress and being overworked and being burned out and appreciated at work. And this gave them a collective realization that they were being boiled alive in their old life pre-pandemic, and they weren't going to put up with it anymore. So this was an opportunity for businesses to learn to adapt and cool the water in the proverbial pots, but many didn't. And that caused a wave of what is now known as quiet quitting, where people are actively disengaged as a form of protest against the hot water that they are sitting in. And we are coming into a recession resulting from the inflation, everything that has been happening to date. And we at Roman 3 we use the context of the fragile grip principle to say that that the way that we handle this fragile relationship that we have, the businesses have with employees, is something that is going to be very telling of how we're going to weather the storm. And we need to realize that we need to learn from the mistakes of the past and all the lessons that we have been being forced to see, like quiet quitting and like productivity paranoia and all this other kind of stuff, and all the union action, to say we need to do things differently, that we cannot lean on convention to handle these new issues. And when it comes to the fragile grip principle, the best way to think of it is that using a harsh grip crushes the egg that's in your hand, destroying its integrity. Using a weak grip neglects the egg in your hand, dropping it at the first sign of trouble. And using a stable grip supports the egg in your hand, balancing its care. And balancing the care of the fragile bond that your business has with employees is a very viable and long-term successful option to weather the storm that's going to be the coming recession. All right. Anything else, James?
No, I think that's good. I've said a lot.
Okay. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video versions hosted on our YouTube channel, Solutions Explained by Roman 3, visit us at roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.